We'd like to welcome the Honorable Minister of Finance, Government of Tamil Nadu. Thank you very much, sir, for taking out the time. Can I please invite Mr. Raj Chengappa, the Editorial Director, Publishing, on stage to please welcome the Minister and introduce the topic of the keynote address.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to give another warm round of applause. because we have a truly outstanding personality. Dr. Palanivel Thiaga Rajan, my pronunciation might be a little bad, but Palanivel, let's get that right. Minister for Finance and Human Resources. He's not your run-of-the-mill politician, though both his father and grandfather were distinguished politicians, one of them being the Chief Minister of the erstwhile Madras Presidency, his grandfather. But I think what makes him distinct is there a brutal frankness about Dr. Thiaga Rajan. And more than that, he has got such a versatile experience. He just doesn't come as a politician, though he comes from Madurai, his constituency, and he actually came specially for us here. He had gone for the mayoral elections where the DMK has won an astounding victory, and then flew back just for us. So for that, let's give him a warm round of applause as well. And Madurai, as I was telling him, is my favorite place because the temple, Meenakshi Sundareshwar temple, I used to visit it very often. And when I went up for my honeymoon as well to Kodaikanal, I stopped there and we took prayers there as well. So it's my favorite place there. I will certainly come again. But his versatility is outstanding. He has a rich experience as a trader. He was with Lehman Brothers before, I think, the collapse. Up till that point. Okay, a banker, a consultant, a lecturer, and a technical person. And very, very importantly, he is both rooted. He did his engineering from Trichy and then went abroad to New York State University and then studied management in one of the most prestigious universities, that's the MIT, in the Sloan School of Management, and then came back. And that's the most important thing. After working 20 years, he decided to come right back to Tamil Nadu and serve the state, and he's been made the finance minister, probably one of the most competent people to head this business. So I'm going to get straight to the question and answer session. And let's talk about this mission that your chief minister has been put for you, which is to make Tamil Nadu a $1 trillion economy. And given the fact that you are 1/3 of that, and given the fact also that you brought out a finance paper where you showed your state was broke, how do you hope to do this? What are the kind of challenges that you face to ensure this happens?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thanks for adjusting the time so I could rush back. I think it's good to have sometimes these goals because they hold you accountable. Now, for those who have studied any finance or the time value of money or the benefit of compounding, to get from here to $1 trillion in 3 years, what we effectively need to do is get about a 14.5% nominal growth rate. That includes inflation. If we assume the FX rate is roughly the same. If it improves, then you get better. If it slides, it gets a little worse. To put that in context, right now inflation is about 6.5%, 6.25%, depending on whose account you take. So if I take that out, that means I need to get about 7.5%, 8% growth, which is not that hard to do. Also, to put it in context, between 2006 and 2011, when the DMK was in power, we had a compound annual growth rate for those 5 years of north of 10% in real terms, without inflation. Add in inflation, you're probably at 15, 16. So 14%, 14.5% a year between now and 10 years is certainly doable. The key is to get the first few years right. If you remember, our predecessor, the lady, had a Vision 2023 document. By the time we came to office in 2016 as opposition, it was already unachievable because you'd lost the first 3 years in flat to 2% growth. Then you'd need to get 22, 23% in the remaining years to make it up. So for us, the good news is that the first 2, 3 years are going to be very good years. We have...
Despite the pandemic?
No, because of the pandemic. Okay. Because of the low base effect of already having had an effective recession and the bounce back from that. Because of the kind of move away from China trends and the possibilities that brings. And because, as you and I were speaking, after 10 years of maladministration, we are able to get the finances of the state and the systems under control.
Right.
So these three will be positives. Of course, you know, we are subject to the same macroeconomic factors as everybody else. And at a national level, I would say some of the programs of the union government, both policy-wise and kind of removing rights and control from the states, is a barrier for us. Okay. Beyond that, the global commodity cycle seems to be on the way up, inflation and commodity prices. And then, of course, things like what happened in Ukraine have serious consequences. So we haven't seen, you know, all those stages play out. So there are going to be headwinds, but at a very kind of local level, we feel very comfortable. I've just finished drafting the budget to take to cabinet tomorrow. And 14.5% is what we achieved. We achieved better than that last year, and we'll achieve that this year. I mean, last year meaning the year finishing in a month. So we're on track.
No, I mean, since you mentioned the budget, can you give us a sneak peek as to what are the, not the budget figures, but what are the thrust of the budget?
No, as I often say, the budget is a prospective document. It only gives an intent. It doesn't tell you whether it's going to be fulfilled. And if you take the last 6-8 years of the TN government budget, the outcomes have been 30-40% variance from the budget. So the budget's almost like a wish list. It's not an execution document. So one of the first things I did when I came to this role is set a policy in my department that we must make budgets that are conservative in terms of we must make at least this much revenue and we must never spend more than this much money unless pandemic and all that out of our control. So we must make estimates that are we are comfortable we can achieve or beat. And then when we do the revised estimate, which is really the key, because now you have 10 or 11 months worth of data, we must hew as closely as possible to the budget. We must do what we said we were going to do. And then by the time the final account comes 6 months from now, it shouldn't be more than 2 or 3% different from the revised estimate, which means that your accounting has not been funny money accounting.
And what would be the key thrust areas of this, where you've sort of said, okay, in this budget, I think I need to look at 1 or 2, 3, 4 areas that is there?
Well, I think those areas the Chief Minister will talk about. But going back to my philosophy, since we came to office when there was already a financial year in progress, and all we did was amend that budget in August, I wanted to make sure that we outperformed that amendment in the revised estimate and that the exchequer was in much better shape than it was when we inherited it. So I think that I am very confident we'll show a remarkable turnaround in a very limited time. And that will set the stage for much more aggressive kind of investment in capital expenditures, in programs and so forth going forward. The budget is, the cabinet meetings tomorrow. The Chief Minister will tell us where we go.
And in the white paper you presented last year was a very grim picture. And part of that problem was that you said a lot of the debt, you're servicing debt, you're taking interest, and therefore the revenue is being met through debt and interest rates, whereas you're not able to focus on capital expenditure for this thing. How are you planning to turn that around?
There's a reason the textbooks say something. Those are proven concepts, right? So when I came to office as an opposition MLA in 2016, in my first speech in the assembly, in my maiden speech, which I had to make in English, I didn't have the skill in Tamil at the time. Now I can speak. But I said...
They're clapping for you.
Thank you. I said the textbook said 2 or 3 things very clearly. It says if you spend money on capital projects, which will give you return today, then you'll get growth tomorrow. If you spend it on revenue deficits, you are not going to get anything back.
Right.
And how much of your revenue is spent on interest payments is an indication of how well your system is in control. And so the RBI in its annual State of State Finances report had said the same thing. What the textbook said, the RBI said, Tamil Nadu used to be a state where you didn't have revenue deficits for 10, 12 years. I mean, from the FRBM Act and equivalent till 2014, till the lady was in control before she got incarcerated and the system kind of slipped. And we used to have, interest payments be 10, 11, 12% of our revenue. By the time we took office, the borrowing was more than half for revenue deficits. We were not even investing 50 paisa of every rupee we borrowed. And the interest payments were north of 20 paisa of every rupee of revenue. So I said in 16, if you go down this path, you will get this outcome. And so we got the outcome that the management gave us. Now we are correcting those, and our goal is to, there's only one long-term solution to everything. That is growth and jobs. Right? Now you have to set yourself up in such a way that you attract the kind of investment and you bring the kind of credibility that both financial investors, like funds and asset managers, and industrial companies feel comfortable that they can come here and create jobs, and whether that's overseas, Indian, other state, Tamil, wherever. And of course, from a jobs perspective, MSME is very important, biggest driver of growth. So you got to make life easy for them, ease of doing business, remove a lot of the rent seeking and a lot of the barriers, cut the red tape. So, that's the only long-term solution. Everything else is financial management that we can do better than others, or process improvement that, with my professional background, I can bring. Those are means to an end. So I'll go the other way. We wanted to show the stability and credibility of good management this year so that we can attract the right investors and the right partners next year. And I think we're on path for that.
In the previous session, we had some startup companies come and talk to us, those that chose Tamil Nadu and Chennai to come and do it. Now, one of the things they said is, fine, the policy is good, right, whatever that is there. The outreach isn't, right? And they feel that a lot of this, someone said you should treat startup guys like customers, not like industrialists in that sense. And given the fact that you're trying to develop fintech, which is again of this thing, what would you say needs to be done? Here you're getting feedback coming in.
Okay, I can answer that at, I don't know, half a dozen different levels. Let's start profoundly. Most government departments and staff are not in the business of providing customer service, at least in their perspective, right? They think they're administering something.
Right.
So that's, the attitude itself is somewhat off. Then you look at whether we have the systems and the infrastructure and the communications capability, and I would say that most governments don't do half as good a job as political parties whose lifeblood is communication and, electioneering. Then you take it to the next level and say, startups in particular, I would say among the departments in Tamil Nadu, the industries department is probably more professionally run and has better functions like the guidance bureau and stuff like that. And we've now started 2 or 3 different initiatives on the startup side, the Tamil Nadu seed investment management, fund management and so forth. So I have actually, just yesterday, for example, I had the finance secretary, industry secretary in my room for some other file discussion. And this is something I've been saying for a long time, is that we should set up a portal and get all the startups, Tamil Nadu first, but anybody really, to come and pitch for the kinds of services and technologies that the government can buy and be the first user, the early adopter. We need help in a lot of things, in mining, in surveying, in food processing. We run all this, we are the only state with the universal PDS, public distribution system. No other state gives every person a card. You use it, don't use it, you get different levels of benefit, those are all different. But we issue every family, whoever asks, without asking what's your income, we issue a card. That has some downsides later, but that's the difference. So we need a lot of help, and there are a lot of people who have the technology. So I've been encouraging for a couple of months now that we should have one of these Sell to Tamil Nadu Day, where we bring these startups, and we ourselves pick the ones that can work, put them in, maybe go in as investors as well into the company, but certainly give them revenue because we're a large state with a big economy. And the budget will be, I don't know, last year's budget was $35–40 billion. That's a lot of purchasing power, right, if you take out the fixed expenses and all that. So I think there's a lot more we can do. I think the Chief Minister has got us all focused on the right things, which is to create jobs and get growth. So, yeah, I'm not saying we're great, I think, but there's more profound problems. It's not only about startup. The nature of government services is not geared towards the notion of customer kind of satisfaction. That's my view. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, since you touched about the public distribution system and the need to streamline that, one of the big things Tamil Nadu has always believed in is being a welfare state, even as it tries to be an industrial state on this. Now, as finance minister, you are the one that's paying the price, right, for all the welfare schemes. There are 2 questions, 2 parts to this. One is, how do you balance the books and make sure that, you are allocating enough for that, where critical sector, social sector, plus for the needy during a pandemic, and, also create capital for growth? And the second point is, a lot of these schemes these days are controlled by the central government. They have these various schemes for farmers, for everything else. How does that gel with your own state program? Are you being funded by them, or this is a kind of a mask that they put?
I'll take the easy question first, the second one. In the sense that the union government has this tendency to start all kinds of programs. The first year they'll fund 80%, state will do 20%, the next year they'll say it's 50-50. The third year they'll still call it the union government name and they'll go down to 20% and we'll be 80%. The fourth year...
You want to name the union government name?
They say you do 100%, but we'll still call it a union government program. So
right.
Not only is it... This notion of one size fits all is profoundly antithetical to actual outcomes, right? I mean, just take simple thing. Simplest thing, because I don't want to waste time on this or make it political. One nation, one ration card. Right? In Tamil Nadu, we already have one state, 7 types of ration cards. What does that mean? If this ration card goes to UP, will they know what the distinction is between the white card, the pink card, the brown card and all that?
Right.
Let's say somebody from UP comes here. My ration shops are not normally stocking wheat and atta and all that. They're only stocking rice and, kerosene and sugar and whatever. How do we supply what that ration card entitles that person to? The complexity of actual execution administration, is crying out for localization and customization. So this notion of one everything is just not actually efficient. It's not productive. It won't give you results. You tell me where there's examples and it's done differently, and then maybe we have a discussion. But that's the easy part. This notion that somehow welfare states cannot be capitalist or, industrial states is fundamentally flawed. You look around the world. Let's take Sweden or Scandinavia. Those countries like Scandinavia, where they have phenomenal social welfare benefits, free education, free maternity leave, free paternity leave, free healthcare, practically everything free, have one of the highest GDPs, highest per capita growth rates, and have best quality of life. I lived for 20 years in the US. You take New York and California, considered liberal states where there's a lot of benefits, have high populations, high growth, high revenue, high outcomes. You take Minnesota, another state that has a lot of benefits. So if you look around the world, you find that those societies that are compassionate, those that try to reduce the discrimination economically, the Gini coefficient, those that try to be inclusive, those that try to uplift the bottom of the pyramid's quality of life, those end up having the best growth rates and the best economies. If you take India, that's very clearly true. Tamil Nadu is by far of the 4 large rich states in Tamil Nadu is by far the most social welfare driven. We spend more than anybody, right, on all these things. And we have one of the best outcomes in human development indicators and social development indicators in gross enrollment ratio in high school or college. So these go together. The more compassionate, the more caring, the more you keep the bottom protected, the more just and equitable your society, the more harmonious, the more productivity and the greater growth you'll have. There's no contradiction at all. Our job is to make sure that the leakages don't happen.
And so what are you doing about that? I mean...
This year I would say we fixed the plumbing, we fixed the infrastructure, we fixed the platform. As I say, I'm very comfortable that we'll show outstanding results in that part of it. By far the most important point is to fix the revenue problem. Right now we have a serious revenue problem. At one point, let's say 6-8 years ago, and going back 5 years before that, the state used to earn about 10% of its GSDP as its revenue. And another 3.5 used to come from the union, from our share of taxes and all that. That 10% has dropped to 7% before the pandemic and 6% now. So if I say my GSDP is now about, let's say, the latest CSO estimate for the current year is 21.8 lakhs or 21.9 lakhs, what's 3.5% of that? 70,000 crores. So we are missing 70,000 crores in revenue that we used to capture through some mechanism. Maybe the GST Council says the net neutral rate used to be 15, now it's 11, I don't know. Maybe it's alcohol sales being done without revenue, maybe it's mining losses, maybe it's fraud in commercial tax. There's many, many components to this. But we have a profound revenue problem. It's a bit common to India throughout, but Tamil Nadu has an extreme case of it because of extreme maladministration over the last 7-8 years. This was not true when the lady was alive. Till 2014, we were still okay. It's only when she went away and then she, got bad health and died and all that, that the slide started. So the immediate focus for this year is to bring the revenue as a percentage of GSDP back up.
Right.
Without being unfair and taxing the poorest, weakest people.
Now, there are some holy cows, and you mentioned it in your review that is there. There's transport, right? You're losing in power. Are you going to bell the cat? I mean, are you just going to push it down kick the can down the road and say the next government let it do something?
No, we have no choice. I don't think these things can last till the next government. We have to start fixing them, and I'm very comfortable that at least on the electricity side, the union government now forces us to 100% cover the loss. In addition to the subsidies we pay, last year's 100% loss has to be met out of this year's budget. So that brings a discipline. And different problems have different root causes. In the transport, it's probably overstaffing and poor equipment. In EB, it's probably line losses and rates. In many rates have not changed in 20, 25 years, 15 years. Something needs to change. The Chief Minister will direct us, we'll fix that.
I see you have sort of ducked that.
No, it has to change. No, there's no question. Let me put it a different way. I'm not ducking anything. At least on the electricity side, within 2 years, we will show fundamental improvement.
Okay.
On the transport side, it's a little bit more complex, but already innovation is coming. For example, in the Chennai city, Greater Chennai Partnership Scheme or something that we have signed with the World Bank, ADB and AIIB, it calls for wet leased buses, wet leased electric buses in some KFW program, and generally wet leased buses. What does that mean? That means you're no longer operating the buses. You're just leasing it, including the driver, including the fuel or the EV or everything. That greatly reduces your losses. It's only when you try to do all of it yourself that you end up with this. So change is coming. It will come in
What
stages.
about this slogan that we keep saying, the government shouldn't be in the business of business, whether it's transport, whether it's this. Why, how much private industry would you like to get into this? I'm just being a little...
No. I think it's a fundamental question, right? Going back, I mean, I would say what distinguishes us as a party and me as an individual is that everything I do, I link back to the philosophy and why we came into politics, right? This concept of social justice, self-respect, equality, inclusion, etc. So from that perspective, the kind of changes that we need to make are not complicated. They very much fit in our 1930 or 1920 philosophy. Some things should only be done by the state.
Right.
Providing free education and water and sewage pipeline and toilets should be done by the state. Some things should be done by the cooperative sector. Justice Party started the cooperative movement in a big way, for house loans, for farm loans, for food distribution cooperatives. And some things should be done by private industry. There's just no way that the government can bring that skill. In fact, I'll go one step further. There are many places now that I'm just going to take charge as the chairman of the Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Fund Management Company. And we are going to seek partners who bring technical expertise in things that we just don't know how to do. So it's not just about money anymore. It's also people who have what we were talking about, the industrial discipline of execution.
Right.
That the government just doesn't have. But we have to be selective. We have to know if it is a revenue producing thing, like a bus stand or a port or an airport, why should I first build it, then run it at a loss, and then put it on a asset monetization pipeline, and then monetize it? Why don't I start at PPP right now? Right. Or why don't I start at BOT right now? So I think there are things, we are very clear about what things should be done by us, what things should be left in cooperative, and everything else should be done by private players. Sometimes you need both, right? Like, why does it help to have a government come private project? Because the government can make sure that no rent seeking and no barriers and none of this artificial, red tape comes into the way, because I'm a partner myself.
Right.
And they bring the technology, the capital, the execution skills that the government simply does not have. And if they are listed companies and large companies, they have to keep an accounting standard and a kind of transparency of their work that governments tend not to put it mildly. Yeah, so.
No, and I mean, this calls for, as you said in your white paper, a generational reform. That was the word you used. So what is that generational reform you have so far brought since you've made that statement, and which areas you're looking at?
See, change comes in bits and pieces. It's hard for you to tell which part of change had what impact till you see 2 years, 3 years later. So, for example, I've said that we are going to show phenomenally better financial management. That didn't come because one day I used my pen, right? That's because of processing 3,000 files, and with the independence the Chief Minister has given me, I've applied what I learned for 20, 30 years in the markets and in administration of large organizations, and I get to do it. But sometimes we legislate change. For example, we have now said that all recruitment to public sector enterprises must happen through the same channel, the Tamil Nadu Public Service Commission. That's going to create second-order problems. We're going to have a logjam. That will force us to review and restructure the recruitment model. So change can come, I think, in bits and pieces. It usually takes, I mean, for a system as big as a government of 75, 80 million people and a 300 billion economy, it's hard to point one act on one day and say this changed the world. But I would say 6 months, 1 year. It's about finances, about the way we fund capital and projects, about how we recruit and run the administration, about the checks and balances. For example, we are changing the whole audit mechanism. Nobody can self-audit them. Right now, you can, for example, my friend Dr. Chandramohan is here. He is the Secretary for Culture, which among other things has the HR&CE, the temples. Till recently, the HR&CE ran its own audit on itself. So we have now broken it away and brought it with the rest of all the audit functions into the financial audit. And
is he happy about it or not?
I mean, he's a professional, so I'm sure he's, So we have a committee now of former PAG, I think he was in Tamil Nadu, looking at how to integrate audit across all of the government, arm's length, internal audit, away from the department within finance, so that we don't wait for the CAG to come and tell us what all went wrong. I was a member of the Public Accounts Committee for 5 years. I can tell you the horror stories. I mean, it's a public document. You can go read it. So we, let me go even maybe just one step deeper than that. Compared to any reasonable sized private enterprise, the design of government administration is, 20, 30 years lag. We don't have continuity, we don't have institutional memory, we don't have inventory management, we don't have, reconciliation. I'm amazed how a system works without what we take for granted in MBA school or in any medium-sized enterprise. I mean, you go to the corner shop that sells you biscuits and, cool drinks. Unilever or somebody has put a sale terminal there to help the shopkeeper manage the shop and to help them get the inventory movement so they can A, see how their products are moving, and B, when to track it and restock. We don't have stuff like that. So there's some engineering that needs to happen.
But you are on that path where you're saying the generation reforms, you're going to make sure that it happens.
Yeah, I would say, starting with the finances this year, because that was the first, the two most important things, the money and the people. In fact, the people may be more important than the money, but it's harder to change the culture, harder to change the recruiting, harder to change the training. But we have focused a lot. For example, Chief Secretary is a former chairman of the Anna Institute of Management. At his request, I have taken over as the chairman of the entire, we've renamed it as the Staff Training College. And we have introduced a new compulsory training program for all of the mid-level Tamil Nadu public servants. And he and I inaugurated it together, and now several thousand people have already gone through that program in the last, 5 months or 6 months since we inaugurated it. So the people and the money and the infrastructure in terms of systems, IT, you fix that and we'll be in some completely different place 5 years. I'm convinced of that. In 5 years, we'll be having a conversation. How did you do so much in so little time?
Well, I hope for that. But let's come to another topic, which, since we are in a federal country, and you have to deal with the center allocating certain resources, I think your white paper also pointed out that there's a declining contribution coming from the center. Now, how unequal is this relationship getting? Are you, what needs to be done?
See, philosophically, just like I said, we tie our actions to our underlying, political raison d'etre. So if I say, I believe in self-respect, I believe nobody else should tell me who's upper caste, lower caste, nobody should tell me in any hierarchy, all human beings are. If I start with the notion of self-respect, it doesn't take long for me to go from there to, independence of thought, to self-determination. How does self-determination come? Through self-governance. How do you get self-governance? Through devolution of power and money down to the lowest level of government. In many cases, the panchayat, the town, the city, then to the state. So, at an existential level, I am against this notion of authoritarian centralizing. But leave that aside for a second. Let's assume that's irrelevant.
Let's talk of the current
government. At the execution level, it is crazy to sit in Delhi and start designing one type of program for the entire country, right? I mean, just I'll give you two examples. Swachh Bharat, they say we build toilets, no problem. They say we'll go directly to the local body, fund them, and they'll build the toilets. Okay, CAG report shows many flaws, no problem. But the biggest problem they have is once you build the toilet, who supplies water to the toilet? Not the union government, right? The panchayat or the corporation. What if there's no water? You have just wasted building all these toilets with no water supply. You can't manage the water supply of every panchayat from Delhi.
Right.
Let's take the Krida Kalyan. Again, CAG report. They allocate funds for things like whitewashing and purchase of furniture and this and that. In places like Bihar, the Krida Kalyan uptake is really, really low. Because where they allocate funds for whitewashing, they don't have a wall, they only have a thatched school. How do you fund it? So the decision should be made by the local people based on what it is. There are like 100 examples.
Give us Tamil Nadu examples of how this money coming from the center really doesn't help you.
I'll give you 3 examples. Number 1, the proportion of money coming from the center keeps on declining every year because of finance commission after finance commission. Number 2, how much of the money comes as share of taxes as opposed to grants and schemes keeps dramatically changing. So
adversely to you.
Yeah, but they give us very little untied money and they tell us how we got to spend the money. You leave that aside. When the money comes, the kind of paperwork that you have to show that you have, spent it is sometimes feasible, sometimes not, and that's in a state like Tamil Nadu that is relatively advanced, has 75% internet penetration, etc. I was in my constituency recently. And I called on an elderly gentleman, happened to be a Brahmin gentleman, an old family friend who I had not known, but I met him when I was out campaigning one day and we hit it off and he told me some old family stories and all that. I went and unfortunately he was a great fan, a great friend, but he passed away like 5 days in between the election results and when I went back. So I went to call on him. And a house that was otherwise empty because the children lived overseas and all that, there were 20, 30 people of the saffron support type, let's just say, leave it at that. I had no problem. They're my constituents. The man was very affectionate to me. I went. And they said, the lady, the widow, her fingerprint is not being scanned by the PDS. So can you fix it? I said, no problem. I called my ward secretary. I said, please go and get her a nominee and we'll get it done. 10 minutes later, they said, no, it's not about her. It's about the system. I said, it's okay. Let me take care of you first. I've come for an inquiry about a condolence. I'm not here to talk systems. 5 minutes later, they said, no, but it's not about us. It's about the system. And I lost it. I said, system, who brought the system? Did we bring the system? I argued in the assembly, don't do this. I mean, if I'm worried about diamond smuggling, I want 15 different checks on them. If we're going to give them food so they don't starve, I don't care if the fingerprint doesn't match. Give them the food. Right? How many cases we see in Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan and all that where they don't match. Right? So we argued. I spoke to then Minister Kamraj. I said, please don't implement this. Please don't force this. It is ridiculous. I mean, again, the theft that happens from the trucks and, falling off bags of rice and all is horrendous. We don't stop that. Then we come and say, no, lady, you cannot get 10 kilos of rice because your fingerprint does. It's ridiculous. So when I said, who brought the system, madam? You say the system, the system. I can fix your case. You want to fix the system? Go and tell the man on the top. He is the one who forced all this homogeneity on us and said everybody has to put a card, everybody has to put a fingerprint.
And when you say that, you're talking to the central government.
I mean, you know who.
I see you. Okay, I think just two quick questions that are there. One, of course, is looking at the per capita decline of Tamil Nadu. Here you have the second largest industrial...
what do you mean per capita decline?
In terms of, not decline, sorry, in terms of the ranking that you'll have, right? Considered the second largest industrial state, doing well in all this, but you see from 2011 onwards, your ranking in the national level is beginning to drop, and I think the highest it reached was, the best performance was 4, and then it started rising again to 6, 7 in the current thing. Now, what is the reason for this decadal decline, and how would you, because at the end of the day, all your plans means money, unless your per capita income is increasing,
I'm not even sure 11 is the right mark. I would say 14 is the mark. I've done a lot of study on this, but let's assume that your data is right. I would say from 14, it's very clear, right? Again, what the textbook says, if you don't have good administration, you don't manage your finances well, long term, you will find a decline. What has happened? So that I'm confident we'll fix. There's a different issue here, which is how do you measure or how do you rate some of these things, right? For example, right now, Tamil Nadu has about 10 or 15,000 rupees per capita lower income than Gujarat. Gujarat has been a phenomenal success story economically in the last 7, 8 years, maybe 10 years. But almost no girl under 15 is not in school in Tamil Nadu. 15, 20% of them are not in school in Gujarat. What kind of growth do I want? There are 4 doctors for every 1,000 people in Tamil Nadu. There's only 1 doctor for every 1,000 people in Gujarat. What kind of society do I want? Not, the GDP numbers are not everything. We have a way of life that we want to protect and preserve. We also want growth, we also want jobs, but we want it our way. That's what the CM calls the Dravidian model. We will implement the Dravidian model, and whatever the shortcomings over the last 10 years, in 5 years, we'll be back on top again. I'm 100% sure.
And finally, looking at human resources, okay, and we were talking in the morning about the industry section. Now, point is you could have industrial growth, but if you don't have the manpower to meet it, the skilled manpower, really, what do you need to do to change that system? I mean, since you're looking after human resources, what is it that you need to do?
Yeah. First, I should make the distinction. I'm only the human resources of the government, not of the state. Okay. There's a labor department and a welfare department. Right. But this is a profound problem, right? As proud as we are that we have a almost 52% gross enrollment ratio in higher education,
right,
which is double the national average, better than the US and all that. It's clear that they're not all getting quality education. Mm-hmm. They're getting a degree, doesn't mean they can actually do anything. So there's a big gap in skilling, and there's a big gap in a lot of other things. We are guys who put our programs and our money where our mouth is. So both in terms of remedial education coming out of 2 years of COVID, where we have, I would say, by far the most well thought out, piloted, researched program called Illam Thedi Kalvi to bring back the social component of learning by having after school in every village, in every block. To the program announced by the Chief Minister on his birthday a couple of days ago called Naan Mudalvan. Says, I want to be the best at what I do. That may be many different things. You may be a journalist, he may be a waiter, he may be a chef, he may be a graphic artist, I may be an analyst. But we got to inculcate that professionalism and that desire to do whatever you do with pride in your work, irrespective of the work, and to fit the skills of these people to the industry and the needs of society. So we had a wide range of people. We had the UK Deputy High Commissioner, my friend Oliver. We had Nadarajan, the cricketer. We wanted to show that there's all these different walks in life and that whatever you choose to do, you excel and you drive yourself. And we are going to set up guidance counselors in every school. I'm going to personally go and lecture for their training. We're going to set up, regular sessions with different industry spokespeople and different careers to come and say, what is it this evening? I'm rushing. I'm going to go release a book in Tamil on audit. What is audit? What is the profession? What skills do you need to have? What is the upside you can get on it? So that people understand that there are careers like that. right? There used to be a time when everybody said, I want to be a doctor or engineer, that's it. Now we need to educate. See, we've had some tremendous shift in society. When I went to engineering college in 1983, the state of Tamil Nadu could only provide about 3,000 seats engineering a year. When I came back as an MLA in 2016, the number was 2.5 lakh, wow, of which 1.5 lakh were being filled. So the two immediate questions I asked, who's teaching all these people? Most of us emigrated and went off to the US. Let's say all of us stayed here, there's only 3,000, you got like 80-time increase. Second, who is giving them guidance or career counseling or, why should you be an engineer? How many jobs are there? Is this really a, career path that gets you employed? And I could talk about this for a long time because when I was in opposition, when Ms. Jayalalitha was still alive, I raised it in my maiden speech. I said, we have this surge of people going to school, nobody to tell them what to study, what to take a profession. And so you must bring out career guidance, not just for the students, but the parents of these students, because most of these students are first generation students. You and I can, my grandfather went to Oxford, my father was educated. I can go and ask him and he'll tell me what the world is about. If you're a first generation student, who do you go to get advice? Who tells you this is what the world looks like, this is how it fits? So the government needs to step up that kind of work. And to be fair to her, she did it the 1 year before she passed. For the first time, the government of Tamil Nadu brought out a book, what after 10th, what after 12th and all that, then it stopped. Now we're going to ramp that up again. So there's a huge issue that we need to get the kind of skilling to match the demands, not just of the state. Let's be very clear. The Chief Minister has said one of his goals when we have the global economic advisors, we have these 5 international advisors. He said one of my goals is that Tamil Nadu should be seen as the premier source of human resources for the world. Like we want to export people, just like we have historically, great examples around the world. We want to send the best qualified talent around the world.
Okay, and finally, since it's Tamil Nadu first, that's the title, and since we are looking at competing with the federal structure that's there, would you rewrite center-state relations? And if you had to do that, what would you do? What would be your...
See, we started in the wrong place. We started because there had never been a country like India, and the culture was 2,000-3,000 years old. The Constituent Assembly naturally focused on how to keep it all together. So they put a lot of authority in the union and much less at the states. Though, ironically, they divided the states based on language. So they knew inherently going in that you have these divergent states. Then, during the emergency and the 42nd Amendment, a whole bunch of additional things got moved out of state list into concurrent list. Basic things like health, education, all that. Now, we just have to benchmark ourselves with the world. If you go to China, the mayor of Shanghai will decide not just planning, have his own police force, have his own industrial permits. The bank license for Shanghai province is not the same as Beijing. Standard Chartered Bank where I work cannot have one license to operate in every province. Every province has to give a separate license. That's how devolved the powers are. I lived for 20 years in the US. My town, my village had its own school board so that those parents decided what their children learned. It had its own police force. It had its own alcohol law. My county had its own sales tax. My state had its own sales tax. There is no national sales tax in the US. Right?
So what would you do?
So the devolution of power in most societies, certainly large societies, all the way from capitalist, uber-capitalist America to self-professed communist China is much closer to the people. Here, so in India, the police itself is state. Then by the time
I'm asking you 3 practical or 4 practical things that you would like to rewrite.
100% education should come down to the state.
Right.
100% health should come down to the state. Direct taxation should be given rights to the states. The city of Los Angeles can levy income taxes. There's a fundamental difference, right, between progressive taxes like income taxes, which you can make richer people pay a greater rate, not just a greater amount, and regressive taxes like petrol taxes or GST, where by definition poorer and middle class people pay a greater proportion of their income in that tax because most of their income is spent on consumables. They don't save and buy apartments and fancy things. So 100% of direct taxation is with the union. That's the only progressive tax. They've kept on cutting that, and the rich are getting richer and the corporates are paying less and less. And then indirect taxation, we say, oh, but GST, you know, the neutral rate is 15, 11.5 is the wrong rate. The ratio of direct tax to indirect tax is skewed by more than 10% against direct tax and towards the inherently unfair, regressive indirect tax in the last 7 years. That needs to be fixed. Give us the power. We'll decide. We'll say, if you want to live in Chennai, you have to pay tax. We don't have that right now. We won't charge the poor people. We'll only charge the rich people. But we don't have the power right now.
Well, you know, Dr. Palanivel Thiaga Rajan, there are a lot of issues that we need to take up, and we've got limited time. We've actually exceeded our time, and we've got our next session. We could have continued this, but thank you very much for this very erudite discussion. Let's give him a very warm round of applause for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thiaga Rajan. We have furiously tweeted all your suggestions and we've tagged everybody. So be rest assured that the message has gone loud and clear. Can I please invite Dr. Suguvanam and Mr. Ashish Kumar, please pardon my pronunciation, to please come up on stage and felicitate our guest. A big round of applause for the Honorable Minister and for the promise of the state of Tamil Nadu.